Okay, I'm Bent Genius, also known as Frank Stark, and today I want to give a spill on why I believe the art of debate is dead. And here behind me on my board, you can see I already have some stuff written down, but I want to say before I start telling you what all these words mean is it's also inferring on people who believe the most wrong things in society. Some people believe Joe Biden is smart as a whip. Some people believe flat Earth. Some people believe Mandela. And that was part of how the debate in America died, is because they turned us into a nation of minority victims that they always get combative to not just fight for flat earth, but also to be combative to anybody who has anything to say about flat earth, period. Which, Shaq, you don't even know how to use a sextant, so you're part of the problem, period. Anyway, there are some things that people just do over and over and believe the dumbest thing possible. So let's go over some words. Absurd malarkey. You know, that is believing in something that is taking a giant proportion of your brain up to be for something like the Mandela effect. You know, they base that on a whole lot of dumb stuff, but when you get right down to it, like highlights, they have two places they print from, one in the north, one in the south. And in highlights heyday, they said Berenstain Bears with a Jewish name in the north, but the Bear-Stain Bears in the south, because those down south printers was like, no sir, not to my kids, when you could be anti-Semitic. But they have these absurd malarkey understandings that they believe any goddamn shit anybody ever spouts to them. And it would just take a momentary glance at any kind of Google search to go down 10 things to find the truth, because the first 10 are gonna be the shit that gets people to believe flat earth and Mandela effect. Period. No offense if you do, you're the victim. Now, unreasonable. Reasonable means logic. Like, reasonable to a person, to me, oftentimes is not going to be reasonable to, say, one of the Kardashians. They might like to freaking waste expensive champagne freaking pulling off a freaking party trick, but me, I would freaking savor every last morsel and never let a bit touch the carpet. Unreasonable things where you just want to be wasteful and you start to grasp onto things that I notice people defy their logic, like with flat earth. They say there's holograms involved and the rich are doing this, and then look, a sextant, let's say the original experiment to see if the earth was round, they took a sextant and put it at the height of a normal sized man and then measured with accuracy with an instrument called a sextant. Where flat earth is wrong, they got a guy who is 7 feet tall, not an average guy's size. and had him looking through binoculars that I would put money on he doesn't even know how to use the tick marks. That he said, yeah, I could see that freaking sailboat 20 more than 20 some miles out. How would he know? He doesn't, and he was standing on a pier, not the shoreline, so of course he was going to see further. And that made people defy their own logic that the world is round to say that it's flat based on Shaquille O'Neal. Period. You know how crazy that is? Moving on. Unconscionable. Where to start with this one? Look at everything that the Germans did. They persecuted the shit out of the Jewish people. And it pains me that even there's an old freaking party of KKK people that today they're just imagining they're a part of it. In the same way that Nicki Minaj and Kanye West and Sean Combs all think they're the Illuminati writing letters to freaking some other guy. They don't communicate like that. And they're all pretending to be a part of this group, which is unconscionable because they're wrecking the honor of what that group used to stand for. And that does not expand to the KKK. They were never righteous. My point is, they persecuted the Jewish. So did the Nazis. So did the Egyptians. It's unconscionable to me that the Palestinians want a Jewish genocide in this day and age, and they're warping our people with unconscionable actions just to make people hate the Jews again. When will they have enough? When is enough enough? Shenanigans. Now, this is a good one. There's a lot of rigged games in our government. And what shenanigans are if a carnival comes to your town and you feel like throwing the baseball at those milk bottles are just a little bit too heavy, you can call the sheriff on shenanigans to come and have them come and see if there's any kind of scammery going on. And when I look at how they turned all of America somehow into not just victims, but everybody is trying to be in the smallest majority they can be in. And in doing so, everybody is going about putting walls between us all that keeps us from having American unity. And I find that so disturbing. I hate that game that they are playing of putting up walls between us. Now, this is the only positive word on here. Anti-descend. You know, it doesn't take much effort to go about your day happy, not in jail, but not descending downward. I noticed that in the victim cards everybody plays, they are descending down and down and down into this freaking hole that, like, people don't even realize they're in it. And it's like, if you lived your life in a means that you are never going to go try and take the low road, you are anti-descending. Congratulations to you and anybody who is doing that. Period. Irredeemable. See, this is a interesting one to me because remember the 80s and 90s population of crack? And everybody wanted, without being entirely specific to people's groups, people started condemning their own people to a life of addiction. And you can take your pick. Whites, blacks, Indians, Mexicans. Somebody talked you into smoking crack. You know what? You smoked crack. You became a victim. And that kind of shit is irredeemable in the same way that all of the people who were stealing U.S. aid and then went about freaking trying to sue to get it back because they feel like entitled to rip off the government, all of their actions are irredeemable. They're never going to come back from that unless you believe the bullshit they spout. Incredulous is a aspect of incredible where like somebody tells you a story that sounds so freaking full of lies that you can't define it as credible. And it's usually because you know the person who's saying it already doesn't have any credibility anyway. It's like he says, I see the pink freaking elephants time and time again, but you'll never see them. But for some reason, people believe incredulous bullshit. And that, to me, is one of the biggest problems with this whole let's protest every damn thing and not have any kind of respect for what protest is actually meant to be in this country, United States, America. Now let's see, unequipped to do. See, this is an interesting one to me because when I look at the education system, have you ever heard of anybody saying, let's teach all of the youth of America how to act during a law enforcement stop? No, you know why? Because that's productive. But let me tell you, they started teaching tranny story time to kids who can't read. And when Nancy Reagan said hugs, not drugs, they started forcing that mentality into children. Period. It wasn't until they told me about mushrooms, LSD, and ecstasy that I would know what I would do every time it appears in front of me. There was such a waste of everybody's time, and it just enticed people to ruin their own lives. Undigestible. See, sometimes somebody comes up and says, how do you explain all the dead unicorns? Unless you take for granted there's some goblins eating them. You know what I mean? Some things are just so far-fetched, so dumb, that when it comes down to it, you should never have heard that and been like, oh man, that's digestible. Because that's the kind of stuff that when they opened the border and then they started saying all the Latin Americans were like breakfast tacos, and they all said, what the fuck are you talking about? Right? Like, they started this whole Latinx thing, and it's like, you know, the only reason they call them Latin Americans is because when Spain came and killed everybody in their country and instilled the Spaniard talk, that's why they speak Spanish. There's some things that are just so undigestible that like I don't understand how they ever came a popular belief. Then there is quasi-wise. Quasi means the opposite of, in most cases, borderlining, not very, but in a mocking kind of way. So quasi-wise, like, there's some people who are going through rehabs right now, and they get told, believe me, I'm doing classes to get over some court shit, but they tell these people there is no such thing as right and wrong. Like, there's no consequence if you go back and do drugs again. They don't care about that. They just care about having something to do all day. And it's like, I don't know where the VA came up with these kind of models for rehabilitation, but everybody talks in a reinforced way to make themselves weak. That is quasi wise. Like teaching people there's no such thing as right and wrong, and not feel too bad if you fuck up again. Can you see why there are a lot of repeat rehabilitation needers? Because you're not teaching them live up to the standards you were in the military. You can do it. How you got PTSD and you can't be the person you were in the military again? Quasi wise. Illogical. Oh man. Like everything about opening the border, making sanctuary cities, that shit was so illogical, but it was logical to the people who wanted to manipulate birthright citizenship. Just let all these people in for 4 years, many kids as you can have. To me, that's illogical that somebody in our government went through and made those actions possible. Period. I find that whole thing illogical. And finally, there is a complete irregard for the social contract that we as a society in America, we all should be following it. We all should be able to say, you know what? You're as honorable as I am. You should be able to say, 2 plus 2 equals 4. But there are people who have gone about making sure that there's no common understanding. And that means there is no regard for a social contract between us all. And everything that I've talked about here all leads to the absolute problem of why there is no unity in America. And I feel like everybody should know persevering while enduring weakness so that you can change is non-negotiable if you plan to be truly strong. Remember, personal responsibility enhances your moral validity, and the power of self-respect is magnified when you go about having to deal with weakness in your day-to-days. Every success is a win. But if you don't know right or wrong, you're just going to keep dipping into your own addiction. And it's like, I can't help but point these things out. I hope you like this, what I'm saying. There will be more at a later date.